Namaste and good evening. Welcome to the Thursday 10 p.m. show, which is an English show, as you know. And we have, as always, Shri Vibhuti Jha, and today we're joined by Pandit Satish Sharma from London. Welcome, Pandit Ji. Welcome,
Jai Shri Ram.
Vibhuti Ji.
Jai Shri
Jai
Ram.
Shri Ram, Jai Shri Ram to everybody.
Jai Shri
All the
Ram.
viewers
Jai
as
Shri
well.
Ram.
Thank you.
And happy Karwa Chauth to all our sisters all over the world.
Gee, may the moon declare itself as soon as possible to everybody who's desperately waiting for its manifestation.
Oh, wonderful. You're very lyrical today, as you should be.
He's always lyrical and poetic.
Oh, yes. We were talking about today's topic, of course, is that there is a globalization of hate, and that's a fact, and that's just a statement of fact. Now, is it affecting the Indians disproportionately because of their own success and because of a rising India? Panditji.
What a wonderful place to start, Sanjayji. Of course it's affecting us. We are like a community who paddles our boat across turbulent waters. Now, what we have discovered is that there are agents of chaos who are creating such turbulent waters. We have no choice but to recognize their existence. You can't have a tranquil boat journey when there is a storm all around us. And increasingly, our little quiet, tranquil silos around the world where we quietly contribute to the communities, build societies, help create wealth and prosperity and happiness, that can't exist when the tide is rising and the tide is a tide of chaos. So yes, the sooner we recognize that this is not a temporary phenomenon, that there are deep, deep currents in the affairs of humanity and society, which are now beginning to be seen. Normally, deep currents are only detected by those people who dive deeply. And most of us, we just see the ripples on the surface of the water. But those deep, deep currents, which have been moving for a while, are now being felt on the surface. We as a community need to perhaps dive a little bit deeper and understand what's going on. Otherwise, our boats will be extremely difficult to navigate, and unless we are genuinely careful and work out what's going on, I fear that there are rocks around us as well. So we do have to really start to pay attention to this. This is a phenomenon that we can understand, that we're capable of understanding, and we are capable of influencing the outcomes. But it requires very, very dynamic, active engagement from us.
Vibhuti Ji, we can see that. In fact, we just had Tulsi Gabbard making a statement the day before yesterday. We saw that only yesterday. And what she said, it seems to sum up where the West is going. And it's not only a racial kind of a engagement, kind of a deracination that is happening in the West, and they become anti-white and then they co-opt Indians into it. That seems to be happening everywhere. So we'll just play the video of Tulsi Gabbard and reflect on what she said.
Remain in today's Democratic Party I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party that's under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers who are driven by cowardly wokeness, who divide us by racializing every issue and stoking anti-white racism, who actively work to undermine our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution, who are hostile to people of faith and spirituality, who demonize the police but protect criminals at the expense of law-abiding Americans, who believe in open borders, who weaponize the national security state to go after their political opponents, and above all, who are dragging us ever closer to nuclear war. Now, I believe in a government that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. Unfortunately, today's Democratic Party does not. Instead, it stands for a government that is of, by, and for the powerful elite. Now, I'm calling on my fellow common sense, independent-minded Democrats to join me in leaving the Democratic Party. If you can no longer stomach the direction that the so-called woke Democratic Party ideologues are taking our country, then I invite you to join me.
Very powerful words. Very powerful words. Almost Lincoln-esque, I would say. Vibhuti Ji, is it having a ripple in the United States?
It is having a very big ripple, and I must tell all the viewers, I'm seeing the comments here. They were all expecting Tulsi Ji to be here today. And I want to tell them that I have reached out to her. I have personally met her, and I've supported her campaign when she was the presidential candidate. And I've got a message from her office that she will revert back soon. As all of us would know, that she has tremendous pressure on her time and commitment, and I do hope that we will hear from her. That said, she has always been on the forefront of change. And she has always been remarkably bold and brave about her statements. And, she's so bold and brave that she knocked off Kamala Harris from the presidential race altogether in the very first debate. So let's give her the credit for being the voice of reason, the voice of sensibility, and she tells the truth as she sees it. And it's very difficult to disagree with what she's saying. And that's true. Panditji referred to he used the word chaos, and I have said that Democratic Party is the agent of chaos in this country right now. They are doing everything from A to Z to dismantle the American content the way it is. So it's really a sad scenario. This particular upcoming election on November 8th, which is just a few weeks away, in which I'm also contesting. It is right now a decisive moment in America, and the decisive moment in the sense that Democratic Party is off the rails, and you see Democratic Party's belligerence in such a way that people with 30, 40, 50 offenses, arrests, they are let go by the judicial system. Cops are fearing whether a 911 call is a trap or an ambush. And you every day see, even the SWAT team, 3 people were shot and hurt by one man who went to attend to a call of domestic violence between 2 brothers. And they were greeted with fire. When you have thus such an undermining of the system, which is what is tragedy in this country right now, what we are seeing is an undermining of a very successful system that is working. And that's what is tragic. And, one of the things is that, this country that tries to export its own version of democracy is failing in its own implementation and living up to that thing. So my question to Sharma ji would be very simple, is that the rise of, awareness amongst the Hindus that has happened, how much has technology to do with it? Suddenly, Hindus have found a voice.
Let me supplement that.
Sure.
We also heard, we were talking about Indians becoming a target, but we also heard Tulsi say that the system is hostile to people of faith and spirituality.
Yes, absolutely.
That's such a powerful statement. People of our adhyatmic orientation, we are ultimately people of tranquility. We seek tranquility so that we can see reality. Asatoma Satgamaya is the desire to be able to see what's real. And in order to get there, our journey is one of overcoming all of those things that trigger us. If you have a look at what the left does, and the extreme left do, is they have weaponized the capacity to trigger humanity. Rather than people actually thinking deeply about any particular issue, there is now a knee-jerk response available, and it's seeded and planted in so many people. And when you get people who have been emotionally groomed in that way, then all you need to do is create an environment where the manner in which you have groomed them can be triggered to get a hostile response. This is how the far left has always functioned. The Nazis themselves, remember, were a socialist party. an extreme party on the left who worked out how to trigger hate, how to seed hate, create fear, and then trigger violence and create chaos for societal change. One thing that struck me when I was listening to Tulsi Ji, it reminded me of a remark that was made by Ram Sarup Ji when he was talking to Sitaram Goyal. And Sitaram Ji said to him that I have completed my journey. I used to be a socialist and I used to be on the left and so on, but now I don't think that it actually makes sense. And Ram Sarup Ji wrote back to him saying, you know, you are too intelligent not to become a communist, but you're also too intelligent to remain one for long. And so when I was listening to Tulsi Ji, it struck me that she has made the same journey. You know, people have heart. I think it was a French philosopher who said, if you're not a socialist in your 20s, then you have no heart. But if you're still a socialist in your 30s and 40s, then you have no brain. And, you know, if I can sort of extrapolate that across history.
Joe Biden has been walking without a brain for 50 years.
Oh, he is the pinnacle of the socialist experiment. And, you know, there is not much more evidence required to provide proof of that particular pudding, shall we say. But I'm also reminded of the journey of our Sikh gurus, how Guru Nanak Ji started with this notion of interfaith harmony and everyone being a child of divinity, etc. And after a short period of time, we then arrive, in terms of history, we then arrive at Guru Gobind Singh, who has realized that in fact there are instances where you have to challenge chaos and violence, you have to challenge barbarism, and you have to use all of the means at your disposal. And so I think Tulsi Ji has made a bit of a journey. She's had a moment of revelation on the road to Damascus, although I think it's probably the road to Varanasi or somewhere else like that. But she has had this revelation, and this revelation, I think, is seismic. There is an understanding, isn't there, that Satya, that's truth, when it's articulated, each of us, we feel it deeply. When you listen to what Tulsi Ji was saying, the first thing that shouts out to you is integrity. She is speaking with complete integrity, and that really resonates. I think it was St. Augustine who once said that truth doesn't need to be defended. It's a lion, and all you need to do is unleash it. And listening to her speech, it was apparent that what she had done was unleashed a truth that most of us already know is there, but she gave it voice, and it now allows everybody else to give it consideration. I think it's a pivotal statement. Vibhuti Ji, you mentioned technology. We are seeing the speed with which technology can cause change in people's thoughts, hearts, and minds. Her voice, her words have resonated in so many corners around the world, carried on the wings of this technology that we now have available to us. That gives me a great deal of hope. I'm fairly comfortable that if the adhyatmic, the dharmic, the people of spiritual journeying who Tulsi Ji referred to, manage to get clarity of thinking, we can actually reverse the harm that has been done by leveraging what's available. And we have a unique position of influence and contribution to make in this space.
In this context, you've seen a lot happen in the United Kingdom, specifically Leicester, and we've seen how these forces that are hostile to faith and spirituality, they triggered another of those anti-spiritual forces that's called Islam. And the left also supported them. And you had this situation over there. How do you view that?
Firstly, once the shock had passed and the surprise had passed, it was a shock for most of our community, and indeed the indigenous community, that Leicester, which has 46% Hindus, Indian origin, indigenous people, that such a large community would become the target of such mindless violence. This was a shock in its own right. It was never expected to happen there. Perhaps in areas where more aggressive, assertive, violent ideologies had larger numbers, we had thought, okay, that's where it's happening. The ghettoization, the process of subliminal ethnic cleansing that has been going on in many of these ghettos, it was visible elsewhere, but not, it was totally a shock in Leicester. But what you have said is, it really rings an alarm bell also, because it shows us that the ideology which fueled ethnic cleansing in so many other parts of the world can be triggered. It's present. And the worrying aspect of it is that the state and the authorities to whom we delegate the responsibility for our safety, they have been demonstrably absent in fulfilling that responsibility. This is a realization that is slowly dawning, as a community which buys into the principle of policing by consent. We have given the right, the authority to wield force for our protection to the police. And we say we will not bear arms, we will not carry weapons, because we give that authority to yourselves. But what happens when that authority that we have delegated is found to be wanting? This is one of the questions that the Hindu community here is having now to reconsider. A while ago, in 2014, I remember doing a program with Dr. Swamiji on one of his channels, where I put forward a hypothesis that a time will come when Hindus in the United Kingdom will be considering Gharvapasi. And there were 4 or 5 steps which I identified which would need to manifest before it got to that stage. And we have made dramatic progress along those various steps. There's only one step left, and I don't want to articulate it. I don't want to contribute towards its manifestation. But I can see a time that unless the state steps forward and fulfills its obligations, we will have a situation of Gharvapasi, and that is not too far. I mean, I'm saying these things, and this is a change that has happened in the last 2 months. 2 months ago, if somebody had said it's possible for ethnic cleansing to happen in such a short space of time in Leicester, everybody would have laughed and said, no, it's not possible. And yet history teaches that these changes happen so quickly. It's not a coincidence that Leicester has been for such a long period of time a Labour-dominated area. The Labour Party have dominated it. They have, shall we say, very deep roots in all aspects of governance, in all aspects of the civil administration. And so it is a remarkable coincidence that a deeply leftist, shall we say, constituency is the first constituency in where Islamists openly exercised a policy of ethnic cleansing. Sanjayji, I don't know whether you have heard, but even more revelations are now coming out. Only this morning, the Lord Mayor, the Mayor of the city of Leicester, Sir Peter Soulsby, he made some remarks. Firstly, he said that he's initiating an inquiry, which everybody thought this is wonderful. And every person of reason and, shall we say, good sense knows that an inquiry is only as good as its independence. So we were stunned and surprised that he then went on to say that, yes, there is evidence of RSS, of foreign ideologies having been present as contributory factors. Doesn't that influence any inquiry? It completely turns the whole principle of an independent inquiry on its head. And yet it seems...
Well, he might have been talking about Islam as an ideology.
No, he was quite explicit about the ideologies he was referring to. And, this has now caused a bit of a shock, shall we say, and people in our community saying, well, hold on one moment. Firstly, we were attacked, then we were vilified, then the national press launched an attack in terms of making allegations that were unfounded. And now all of a sudden, the mechanisms for justice, the mechanisms for inquiry, they too seem to be taking a stance which is far from equal, far from unbiased. And so, as I've said before, we are being educated in the reality. And this reality really needs to be understood and embraced and responded to with a sense of urgency. We cannot pretend that we are in the dharmic world that we like to believe. There is an adharmic world which is also now beginning to make its presence very strongly felt for us.
Vibhuti Ji, something similar happening?
Yeah, I was.
Back up.
Yeah, Leicester was a shock to the system.
Leicester, and the interesting thing is that the community has been mostly voting Labour, just as the community has been voting democratic in the United States.
That's right.
And whatever these so-called progressives, I think they have gone left of the left.
That's exactly the point, and I wanted to hear Panditji's view. Because there's a question has been asked here, and it is a concern here, that can a Leicester happen in the United States? It may not happen in Park Avenue in Manhattan or Long Island here in New York, where I am, or Beverly Hills, but it could very easily happen in Cerritos in California, Anaheim in California. It could very well happen in Jackson Heights in New York, or Queens areas, where there is a predominance of communities living there. And particularly when, as you very rightly pointed out, Sanjayji, that 80% of the Indians have been voting Democrat in this country. But so what do you think, in your perspective, Sharmaji, do you think it's possible? Although I will juxtapose it by my thought, I feel fear is serious, concern is serious, but the probability may not exist. Your thoughts on that?
Gee, I would take a slightly different position. I would go as far as to say, yes, it will happen. It will happen faster than you can possibly expect. It will happen in places that you never anticipated it happening. Because there is a dynamic, there is a mechanism, there is a process which has been launched. And this process has a number of steps. And it's been deployed against the Sanatani family and also other communities time and time again. Right? And our community struggles to acknowledge the reality, because if you acknowledge the reality, then you are required to act. And very few people have become habitually capable of acting irrespective of whatever is required in order to defend themselves, in order to protect their investments, in order to protect their businesses. And this is the major weakness that we actually have. It will happen, and our community needs to abandon this sattvic ahankar, which seems to find some sort of self-congratulatory virtue in being impotent and being sort of above all of these terrible things which are the domain of barbarians and uncivilized people. This is a handicap for us. It prevents us from seeing exactly what is unrolling in front of us. Any student of history, any student of these ideologies, any students of the mechanics of how hatred has been seeded in the past and leveraged, any person who has studied the history of the Jewish people will recognize that it was nothing to do with the Jewish people themselves which brought hardship upon them. It was because other entities had decided that those Jewish people did not fit into their vision of the future. This is the classic dilemma which Duryodhan and Arjun and the Pandavas and everybody was stuck in. This was the Chakravyuh which had to be broken. They didn't realize that their very existence was a threat to Duryodhan's philosophy and worldview and desires for the future. That there was nothing they could do, because their very being, who they were, how they identified themselves and their value system, that itself was the threat. And as long as that value system exists to undermine the foundations of more aggressive value systems, we will be targets. So it's going to happen. It will happen very, very quickly. And we really do need members of our community who have been supporting ideologies, political parties, without doing the appropriate due diligence and research into what their drivers were, what their destiny and their goals were. Those members of our community who have been making these, shall we say, contributions and supporting them, they are culpable. The gentlemen, the group of gentlemen who raised millions for the democratic election, and from our Hindu, Indian, American community, they are culpable. They have participated in bringing about today's reality. They were negligent in not understanding the direction of travel. There is still time for them to step forward and get involved in saving, shall we say, our communities, and indeed the American dream. You know, all of these are under threat. And we need to become more mature. We need to be not so tribal. We need to be able to scrutinize policies. We need to be able to scrutinize allegiances who is paying these various political parties, what is their desire. And that's the only way in which we are going to fend off what I'm fairly certain is actually approaching. There's no doubt about it, Vibhuti Ji, it will happen faster than anybody ever expects. It always does.
Now, I will just ask a follow-up on that.
Just
Sanjay
1
ji.
minute. Let
Sure.
me request the
Yeah.
viewers for questions. Please ask your questions, shoot your questions to Panditji. And you can do that through WhatsApp as well as through the super chat. Yes, Vibhuti Ji.
Yeah, since you have confirmed the inevitability of it happening, not about, no doubt about that, but when it will happen, we do not know. But as the saying goes, we have to do our own self-reflection, and you lamented about that we are so lost in our own little, ahankar of knowledge, that it worries to the extent that are we such shatranj ke khiladi, to use the famous phrase, or have we become lotus eaters, that we don't see the bleeding obvious? And why?
The Upanishads repeat time and time again, learn to see. Asatoma Satgamaya, we are people who seek darshan. We are people who understand that the mind is actually the least capable tool with which to understand reality. And the capacity to see clearly is much, much higher. Wisdom is something that is revealed, whereas confusion is something that can be indoctrinated. And this is a harsh fact for us to recognize. We pride ourselves, generally speaking, on our intellect, on our superior understanding, and so on and so forth. And all of those are deeply, deeply flawed tools with which to navigate the future. We have to recognize the reality, and the reality is very, very simple. The reality is that for a long period of time, our view of existence has been targeted. It has been threatened ever since the Turks came over into that part of the world, and it has never ceased, and it won't cease. We have to understand this. We need to recognize that there are people who profit from chaos. There are people who are asset strippers, civilizational asset strippers. They love to try and take whatever they see as value, irrespective of the cost of taking that from the source civilization. This is the level of their own existence and understanding. What is it that prevents us from recognizing that? We need to do this in introspection. One thing that we should really, in Punjabi, we have a wonderful saying about weddings, that you always have to be wary of the guest who looks for somebody else's family wedding to go and get drunk and to pick fights, right? Because after the wedding's over, that person will have gone, but the wedding itself will have been devastated. If you have a look at battlegrounds, look at Ukraine at the moment. No matter what happens, who wins, Ukraine has become the loser. And so again, there are people who are seeking battlegrounds where they can go and wage some sort of notional conflict with no other intention than destroying the battleground. There are people who want to do exactly the same to Bharat, create conflict there, create strife, create friction, with no intention of some superior understanding being established, no intention of a better way of living being established, the only intention being to destroy and deconstruct the battleground. We need to recognize this as the reality. And it's only once we recognize this as the reality that we then have the opportunity to summon the courage to do something about it. And once you summon that courage and start to engage with the problem, all of a sudden you start to see Dharmo Rakshiti Rakshita in action. You start to see the much wider Brahmand actually participating and supporting your activities. So this is the journey that we have to make, Vibhuti Ji. This is the journey that most of us who are civilizational aristocrats, and I don't mean that in a good way, we have to recognize that there is a need for us to look at the reality and face the reality as it is. Ramchandra Ji was Maryada Purushottam. He was the ideal, the role model in so many areas. And he recognized that there was a time when what you have to do is engage and change to adapt to the circumstances that are confronting you. From the young man who was educated by the gurus when he was only 16, he grew into the person who built an army and then challenged adharma and took the challenge to its logical conclusion. This is the situation that we're finding ourselves in. I wonder sometimes whether we are doing enough to prepare our next generation in terms of having them understand what Maryada Purushottam really means. And maybe this is a Diwali that is approaching. Maybe we should recognize the deeper meaning of what Diwali is. We should recognize the period that the Ram Parivar behind me had to go through before Ayodhya was lit with light and festivities. There is a lesson there that we are being taught. We should embrace that lesson, find the courage, and for the good of many, many people, do what Tulsi Ji has done, which is and find a way to actually make that reality. So important.
Quite right. I think you put it beautifully. You think that the Indians living in India and the Indian government can have a role in protecting our overseas citizens? So we very proudly and very happily give the recognition of overseas citizens of India. Does that also bestow a concomitant duty on the Indians and on the government of India?
Vibhuti Ji, would you like to speak to that first before I...
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay.
The question is direct to you.
Sanjay Ji, this is an interesting relationship which we are seeing evolve on a daily basis. When I think back to the number of high commissioners here in the United Kingdom over the last couple of decades, certainly the last decade who I've interacted with, they had absolutely no notion of an obligation or the existence of a deeper relationship with the diaspora community. It was almost crystal clear that you guys are British citizens. We are here to represent the interests of Indian citizens. And if there are minor things that we can facilitate, such as consular activities, then we'll do that. And that was the extent of it. There was very little support. There was very little, even, shall we say, a welcoming desire to embrace each other. But that, I would say, that has changed dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years. And we're seeing it change. Even at this moment in time, some of the rhetoric and some of the conversation that is now we can witness from the MEA, it seems to indicate that there's an appreciation that the diaspora is actually an appendage, a civilizational extension, a tentacle which can transparently and positively project dharmic civilizational, Bharatiya Rashtra civilizational values into every corner of the world. I think that has been recognized. How that's going to be implemented is something that's now being worked out. I'm actually quite positive about that aspect. Sanjay, there's one other thing that shall we say, a thought has arisen in response to your question. Bharat has a genuine democracy, more of a democracy than the vast majority of the European nations, and certainly more of a democracy than America. I wrote a little bit of an analysis a few years ago in which I referred to the European democracies as sham democracies, that behind them are still the colonial establishment structures, and they have hidden behind these sham democracies. And the population engages in trying to work out some way. Is it going to be socialist? Is it going to be capitalist? How are we going to organize our affairs? And I think it was Chomsky who said that the best way to misdirect and completely engage a population is to create an environment in which deep and intense engagement and turmoil can be addressed with, but have a framework that nobody can ever break out of the framework. So you have the impression that you're engaging with change and evolution without ever glimpsing the framework underneath, which prevents real evolution from changing. And frankly speaking, what I think is happening in America is people are recognizing that there is a framework which actually prevents societal change from occurring. Now in Bharat, we are seeing that sort of societal change occur in concordance, in harmony with the wishes of the majority population. And I think the Western powers are probably deeply, deeply concerned at the appearance of a genuine dharmic democracy. And a dharmic democracy, which when it existed in full flow in the past, it created a powerhouse of human evolution, huge GDP, massive leaps forward in the human condition and human consciousness and the understanding of the world that we live in. So I think that the West is actually concerned. It sees that its sham democracies are now being revealed and being detected on a daily basis. And in Bharat, it sees the appearance of a genuine a dharmocracy, a genuine dharmic democracy. And so this is the opportunity. I think if Bharat can deliver a fully fledged dharmic democracy, there is an opportunity for the rest of the world to follow suit. And in that world, anybody who is connected with the principle set, the value set, the ways in which we execute the functioning of a dharmocracy, those people can contribute towards the evolution of Western sham democracies.
Okay, this is a request the viewers who are watching to please like the video, and also, of course, please do share the video, and all the new viewers, please subscribe to the channel. Now, you talked about democracy. Now, that's a wonderful concept, and we are trying to build a democracy here. But there's something that struck me really, and that is a huge change in the 10 years that my interaction with the rest of the world, particularly with the West, has been. That we used to feel that West has got freedoms. Now suddenly we realize that things like cancel culture, things like repressing your voice, your conditioning you to speak only what the establishment wants, that seems to have taken a stranglehold, especially in the USA. But since the USA is in the vanguard of the Western model of democracy, it seems to be taking root elsewhere. Whereas we feel far freer over here in India, where the left has been dominant for, how many years, how many decades? Panditji.
Well, I talked of sham democracies. If we wind the clock back a little bit, America was established largely by two types of people. One group of working class people who were fleeing the horrors of a tyrannical monarchy and aristocracy in the United Kingdom. Remember, they fled what was pretty much poverty. They were confined in a class system which limited their activities. There was no freedom here. And they fled this country and risked the hardship and the dangers of a transatlantic crossing to go to a world. That was one group of people who left. But the other group of people were also the same people who left this country, but left as representatives of the British monarchy and British power. The American Civil War was that rift. It was that time, that conflict where America tried to break free of those same tyrannical forces. I don't believe that America ever truly broke free of those tyrannical forces which were established on colonialism and slavery. I think what has happened is that those forces learned how to present themselves in a different manner so that they could then lay their roots. And their functioning has always been the creation of chaos, the creation of conflict. Divide and rule is as present and as prevalent in the United States as it ever was in any of the colonies. The left versus the right, what Tulsi Gabbard has just articulated, a cabal of warmongers. Isn't that the policy of divide and rule in action? If we have a look at the same mindset, it's still doing its mischief all over the world. The Rwanda experience, where peaceful people were suddenly at each other's throats, so much so that they killed 800,000 of their own countrymen before that tide of hatred had passed. And that wasn't by accident, that was by design. So yes, from one perspective, we are seeing the West do what it always has done. And I really do at times have a concern for the well-being of the non-1%, in the West who I think are going to be in very, very great difficulty. The East, on the other hand, has another opportunity. When I say East, I suppose I should say the global South, really. This appearance of the BRICS community. If that BRICS community does manage to come together, it poses such a powerhouse economic challenge to the West's, shall we say, financial cabal. And that is also something which they have taken into account, which is why target Narendra Modi. Can you imagine at the heart of BRICS, a dharmic, democratic powerhouse which is economically strong, challenging the hegemony of the West's financial systems? This is another reason for why we are going to see Project Target Modi suddenly take on a whole different dimension in the next 12 months. Every aspect of what can we do to denigrate and vilify the appearance of this democracy will be focused on destroying the chances of the BJP being re-elected. These are the next 6 to 12 months that I foresee for us.
Coming back to that particular thing that you referred to, Mr. Modi, and the arising of the Hindu part, it's very important to bear in mind that demolish Modi, or conversation was started by George Soros, who committed $1 billion of his own funds to destabilize Hindu philosophy and our way of life and Prime Minister Modi. As a result of which, you are seeing the attacks going far with greater violence and greater rapidity. And it's becoming more and more vicious. And whatever Prime Minister Modi will try, it will be labeled as anti-minority, it will be labeled as rise of Hindutva, it will be labeled again as not caring for people. At the bottom of it all is the rise of Sanatan, what you referred to earlier on. The rise of Sanatan, thanks to science and technology, is rampant. Natural laws are gaining momentum. Thus, West probably fears the Indian growth story. And that he has done a remarkably good job of uniting the Indian diaspora globally. But I'm also referring to another element that you talked about. You referred to Tulsi Ji's conversation about the warmongers. Look at what is happening in Ukraine. There is nobody trying to stop the war, but every European supporter of Ukraine, whether it's supporter or not, I do not know. It is the country is done. Country is done. Somebody will make money by reconstruction work that will happen. But everybody is saying we will supply weapons so they can fight the Russians. Nobody is talking about stopping the war. And I think Tulsi Gabbard has been amazingly bold about it, because even in a presidential bid, she talked about, as a soldier who has been to several tours to Afghanistan, she saw these things happen and she recognized that how the machine is operating. Do you think the establishment of the United States will let her succeed in her mission?
Well, who knows? She is a Bhakt of the Bhagavad Gita and follows the guidance of Bhagwan Sri Krishna. And she is doing her duty. She made a few very remarkable statements in her resignation speech or her departure speech. Do you remember she said that the mainstream had vilified her to the degree of saying that she was a Russian asset?
Right.
Okay. Can you imagine the power and the confidence and also the desperation in a mainstream media which is able to go that far on the basis of zero evidence whatsoever? It felt it needed to be able to do that. It felt it could do that. That was over there in the Americas. Here in the United Kingdom, we have had attacks on a completely integrated and very well-functioning Hindu community. And out of nowhere, the attacks have been directed. And the voice is saying there are Hindu fascists associated with Prime Minister Modi. Nobody has found any evidence of it. But it's the same media which is trying to build up this rhetoric of hate and fear so that it can then escalate and move towards chaos. It doesn't take too much research to recollect the number of American leaders who swore, who gave oaths, who signed treaties and committed to the simple statement that NATO will not move 1 inch towards Russia. And yet all of them lied. All of them have abandoned the statements they made and plowed into Ukraine. And this is poking the bear. So there is no integrity in this cabal. There is no dignity. There is no honor. There is no validity. There is no basis in just law behind the actions that are being undertaken by this cabal that Tulsi Ji has alluded to. And when this set of situations arise, the one thing which stops it is when enough people, enough common people who are always in the majority. Remember, it's the toxic minorities who are the warmongers and the fascists who cause these difficulties in human progress. When enough decent, simple people manage to see that evil exists in their midst, that there are small numbers of people causing the difficulties nationally and internationally, and then speak with one voice. That is the only thing that has ever changed the course of human history and prevented wholesale devastation. And we're in exactly the same place. Tulsi Ji's voice is an appeal to the average American, is an appeal to the simple people who just want to get on and have decent lives with a degree of safety and comfort where they can receive the benefits of their labors. That's all the vast majority of humanity want. And she is speaking directly to them. Prime Minister Modi ji speaks directly to the same demographic. The one area that we've been weak is that this war is being fought in the Anglophone sphere. This Kurukshetra, this war of words, this changing the rhetoric and everything else is being fought most in the Anglophone sphere. And we're relative latecomers to this battleground. But Sanjay ji, your initiatives with Jaipur Dialogues, the other initiatives of other YouTubers and other media who are now saying we have to be able to engage in this space is making a huge, huge contribution. And we're catching up on lost ground very, very quickly. Just imagine if the average Bharatiya citizen becomes fully aware of what's going on in this space and decides to engage with it. Increasingly, we're seeing that. The success of the BJP is indicative. 180 million and then 229 million people supporting this BJP party. This is indicative of the common man, the average citizen, wanting to say, we want a peaceful, tranquil, harmonious, prosperous way of living. And if you can energize and motivate that demographic in every country, all of a sudden dramatic change happens. And it doesn't matter whether it's the United States, it doesn't matter whether it's Iran, where the simple people are taking off their hijabs and saying, no, we do not want the imposition of this toxic masculinity. And change is happening. It's always a difficult time, but I'm very, very confident that this is going to be our next evolutionary step.
Before I move to the question, just one comment.
Okay.
That this could be an inflection point, especially because once the diaspora rediscovers its roots, then it has its own unique way, and I think it has disproportionately large powers to put pressure on the Indian government to go the dharmic way and make it a dharmocracy. So I think there can be a very big resonance. That's quite possible. And
I
with
wholeheartedly agree, Sanjay. Completely agree with your observation there. And I'm sure Vibhuti Ji will also agree with that.
Yes.
There is a meeting of minds and voices which is expanding the vibration of dharmic understanding into the Anglophone sphere.
And yes, for that we must thank the progressives of the Labour Party and of the Democratic Party in the United States for letting go, and also for the Republicans and the Conservatives to realize that they're not doing a great service to themselves by being far-right Christians. And,
well, not just anybody can awaken Kumbhakarna, and we are grateful for their diligence and their commitment to awakening the sleeping Sanatani. The Kumbhakarna Nidra is now slowly being disturbed, so we appreciate their contribution.
Yes, awakening is happening, and
so thank you to old Bill, and thank you to Liz Truss.
Yes.
Thank you to what's that stupid home minister that you got right now?
Oh,
Yes.
she's work in progress. Suella Braverman is she's honest and she articulates courageously what her understanding is. I don't feel that it's anything to be troubled about, because all of us learn about different areas at different spaces. She has said what she has felt. She's had the courage to say it. I hope she has the courage to receive the information and the knowledge that people will be sending back to her. And our community is becoming very passionate at providing feedback to politicians. So perhaps we'll see a rapid evolution. And if we can help Suella Braverman to also take the same journey to Damascus that Tulsi Ji has taken, who knows? We may see a new voice appearing on the dharmic side.
Yes, journey to Kashi, maybe. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I believe that awakening is replacing
Or journey to Mahakal now.
journey to Mahatma.
Okay, Vibhuti Ji, I think let's take questions.
Yes.
And before I go to questions, once again reminding everybody, please like the video, share the video, and of course, please do put your thoughts in the comments section after the video is over. Reminding once again everybody that 5th and 6th November we have our annual festival, Jaipur Dialogues annual event 2022, and registrations to just one category, it's called Supreme category, are still open, so you could just sneak in. So with that, questions. QWERTY regarding US doesn't matter, Democrat or Republican, it's all rigged there. US establishment and bureaucracy is controlled and hijacked by certain people, which can be traced back to Boston Brahmins and old money families of Europe who were in opium and slave trade, bunch of biggest gangsters, mafia on earth. Your views?
I would say that Vibhuti Ji, you are the man on the ground over there, but from where I'm standing, I think that's a pretty...
He's fighting an election, so let us spare him.
That's difficult to dispute. The assessment is correct, as far as I can tell. If you have a look at the league table of nations who have participated in wars over the last few hundred years, America sadly tops the league table.
That's right.
Next.
Hannibal, I read that South Korea is working with Pakistan on defense cooperation. Is there a deliberate attempt to stifle India geopolitically, culturally, and economically?
It's a great question. I've never really spent too much time on understanding South Korea and its role in the neighborhood. But one thing I do know is that South Korea has a heart which pulsates with dharmic values. South Korea has a deeply, deeply spiritual tradition of human beings engaging in sadhana in their own language, in their own scriptures, in their own teachings. And it's only a question of time before that darshan starts to color their understanding of, shall we say, Pakistan, which has a slightly different ethos and a slightly different manner of engaging. So I don't think there is a difficulty there. Sometimes you have to know what adharma is to better appreciate what dharma is. And maybe their relationship with Pakistan is that part of the journey on their road to Kashi.
Okay, Ashish, what about digital colonization of India by the US? Most Indian tech startups like Baidu, Swiggy, Zomato, Ola all have majority US investors. US enjoys virtual monopoly in software and hardware in India. If US decides to punish India and turn off, it will crash Indian economy. Can you guys stop your jingoism? Vibhuti Ji, that's up your street. Are you a jingoist?
No, it is not jingoism. It is, we are not indulging in jingoism. We never have done and never will. The question is that how do you arise for yourself? Your opponent will do whatever they have to do. The question for all Indians to answer is, am I doing what I must? And if we begin to answer that question, perhaps will be a greater amount of awakening. Assertiveness, that is what is required. Whatever others do doesn't matter. What you do matters.
Right.
Sanjay, I have a thought I'd like to share on this, and I think it's a really good idea for us to recognize this. As a community, we are people who we have a preference for evolution rather than revolution. Now, the thing about Adharm is that Adharm is incredibly dynamic. It's always creating, it's always finding ways to create something new so that it can fulfill its adharmic purposes. And, the internet's a great example, isn't it? The internet was created to better improve the robustness of the American war machine. It was never created for our T-series bhajan mandlis to suddenly dominate the internet traffic by sending Hanuman Chalisa 30 million views within sort of 2 or 3 weeks. What we have to learn is to appreciate what's been created, to work with it, to improve it and take it into a dharmic direction. And that's what's necessary. It doesn't matter what the opposition creates. If we can find a way in which we can engage with it and give it better direction, then I think that's a dharmic contribution. So irrespective of all of these US investors, these virtual monopolies in software, etc., 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 it doesn't matter. They're creating a framework. The choice is ours, whether we exist within that framework or whether we help that framework evolve into a dharmic direction. It's a lot easier to take hold of a framework that somebody else has already constructed and then change its course and its direction. And that's the right thing to do. I saw only today an announcement that a new platform has been announced by the government of India, which will enable Bharatiya companies to challenge head-on the dominance of the Amazons and the Flipkarts, etc., etc. And that's a wonderful example of the principle that I've just highlighted. Let's make anything and everything that the dharmic nations create fully dharmic.
Absolutely. Next.
Goblet fire. A few years ago, I came across this college girl in the US who said that 40% of their high school class came out as LGBTQ. I was shocked. Is your observation goblet fire? No comment on that. Oriental Arms. Pandit Ji, as per UK Home Office, what is the timeline for Sharia to be adopted in the UK? I'm sure they have envisaged this very real scenario. Vibhuti Ji, if you remember a few days ago, I mentioned Koreatown attack in the US. This is inevitable. This will happen to Sanatanis as among all immigrants in the US. The Sanatanis have the lowest rate of gun ownership.
So if I can just reference the sentence directed to myself, and the British are, shall we say, very, very deep and very long-term thinkers. And their policy has been to cultivate snakes in other people's backyards for their own benefit. And we have an understanding that if you cultivate snakes, then you have to be prepared to be bitten from time to time. And I think what they're now experiencing is the revelation that perhaps they have not been as cautious as they should have been and could have been. When they decide to respond to this, they will decide and respond to it in a very decisive manner, making sure that the benefit that they derive is maximized according to their direction of travel for the country, and that they will also do it with the maximum of, shall we say, destruction for whoever they deem to be no longer aligned with their interests. So I don't think that we will see a timeline when Sharia will be adopted. Becoming very, very aware of the situation here. There is a great deal of resistance to the Islamization project in this country. And fortunately, the Islamization project is actually still only the pet project of a very toxic minority. There are a great number of people who are leaving extremist ideologies. There are an increasing number of people who are becoming vocal about the reasons why they have abandoned these extremist ideologies. And so let's support the evolution of a much more mature mindset from Islamism and from Christianism. And let's participate in the evolution of these beings on their journey. I don't think it will happen. Let's see.
Next. Project Hindu Kuch, Pranam all. British media, BBC, etc. now is a weaponized attack dog of the deep or not so deep state machinations, working towards vilifying RSS, Hinduism, and by extension, Modi for 2024. When stakes are that high, what impact can be expected with on the ground protest in front of their offices in London?
So that is a reference to the forthcoming, I think the 29th of this month, there is a protest being organized by Sanatanis, Hindus and friends of the Sanatani family, and also enemies of the BBC outside of the BBC offices. It's a first, and I think it's a wonderful thing. It may be completely ineffective. The BBC is like a giant elephant, and generally our protests are like mosquitoes. But it's a first, and what we're doing is we're developing the muscles and the understanding of how to engage in protest. It's a wonderful development. I think it's a great development, even if it is at this point in time not so effective. But I would share that there are very creative people amongst our communities now, and there are people who are talking all over the world about how we can engage in what I described last year as the appearance of Satyagraha 2023. In every diaspora community, we are going to see Satyagraha 2023, and it will be delightful to behold. There is a project which is being designed particularly to help the BBC embrace a more enlightened role in the 2023s. And when you see it, I'm sure you will recognize that it is a wonderful development. It will be a Satyagraha.
Okay, next. That's
Project
a
Hindu Kush
continuation
again.
of the previous one. Yeah.
Project Hindu Kush again. In the British press, there are few known Indian and Hindu batters who led the Hindu baiters who led the misinformation charge around Leicester incident. Is there any remedy in British common law that can be sought for remedy? What would the Jewish community do?
So this is a great question, and it's a question that has been taxing the minds of many people in our community who want to respond to this. There are a great number of options. There are a great number of, shall we say, well-wishers, including the Jewish community, who do not like what has been done to the Hindu community. More and more questions are being asked. We're at that stage where all of these rogues, these snakes who have been hiding in their snake holes, they're all coming out, and they're all merrily declaring their identity and who they are and what their allegiances are. And I don't think that's a problem. I think it's a great opportunity. It's a great chance for us to recognize who these people are and how they function. And what will then happen is that we'll find a solution. The crux will come when we have exhausted all of the means of engaging with justice, the judiciary, as well as the establishment, and found that they haven't served us. The time, I think, will come when perhaps we recognize that we have been betrayed, that the authorities who said that we will look after you, that we are your democratic representatives, that your interests are most paramount, that we legislate to protect every single British citizen, when each and every one of those statements and values and virtues which have been sold to the British community are found to be lacking, that's the moment when change will suddenly occur. And that moment will happen. Remember, in the United Kingdom, it took the best part of 50 years for justice to be delivered to the victims in the football tragedy. Remember also that justice has yet to be delivered to the poor victims of all of those grooming gangs, which number in the hundreds of thousands acts of criminality. And so we are on that journey to discover the extent to which the establishment genuinely looks after the British population. I think that will be the greatest revelation. And Sanjayji, when we have an opportunity, there are some ideas that I'd like to explore with you with regard to that particular aspect. But thank you. It's a great question.
Sure. Absolutely.
Mehul Shah. Awakening is happening amongst Indian Americans. 2024 elections will show fractured mandate from Indian Americans. It will not be wholesale voting for Democrats. Republicans need to nurture this bloc, just like Hispanics. If I may say, Mehul, thank you very much for the ambition and hope that you have shown. And I would say that the Indian community must begin to show that in next few weeks. 2022 is happening. This is the time to show your might, your anger, your frustration, and the righteousness, all of it together. Come together in 2022. Why wait? It's only when we create the awakening at the right moment, then the bigger change can be done in 2024. But thank you very much for asking this question.
Sanjayji, with regard to that, there is a perspective from the UK which is probably worth sharing. Politicians expect horse trading. Politicians expect harsh negotiations, strong, assertive cases to be presented to them. They expect to be challenged and then required to step up. They do not expect to be embraced with garlands and then for the community to think, well, they now should know everything that we need. This is our lack of maturity in the political space.
Right.
We should not be expecting them to nurture us. We should be demanding and engaging with them to deliver on the constitutional rights that you have as citizens. So let's not let's abandon the chai pakoda, samosa, har, and the tying of rakhis at Raksha Bandhan, the celebration of Diwali and giving them mithai and annakut and all of this, which they love, but it doesn't require them to do any single task or anything at all. And they love that. So we really need to step up our game. The Republicans...
That's exactly what the senator once told me, and I will repeat it here for all the Indians that were here, that he told me that we love you Indians as immigrants to this country. You are professionals, you are hardworking, you are in the highest median income, you have family values, you take care of your children, you are not a law and order problem, and you ask for nothing. So if you don't know how to ask, you don't get.
You don't get it, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's an expression I heard very recently, that the squeaky wheel gets the grease in adversarial political systems.
In our American Express, the slang was that the crying baby gets more milk.
Yeah, exactly. Next. Ganga Datta Yamuna Datta. Sanjay, so is it possible for you to start a Fate to Choose series and how they are limited to tiny Israel? Hindus must know they are next. I think a completely inapt comparison, because Jews have won that space. They conquered that space for themselves. And they found a safe haven for themselves. They founded it. So what are you talking about? They're limited. They're not limited.
There is, this is such an important point. Hindus do not have a state which protects them. Nowhere in the world is there a state, a government, a judiciary, a legislature which protects them. The Jews have one such state, and that was the reason why they desperately wanted a state, because in that state they could then arrange for their own protection, they could arrange for their own defense mechanisms, they could arrange for their own army. Hindus do not have this, and this is something Hindus need to realize. And hopefully Hindus will realize it before they find themselves in the circumstances which the Jewish people found themselves in, stateless. This is a fundamental requirement that we have to make happen, that Hindus have to make happen, that Sanatanis have to make happen. Vibhuti Jha, I have a chat from time to time with members of the indigenous civilizations in the United States, and they often make this lament. They say that we do not have a government that acts in our interests. You know, we are part of a government. We lost our land. We are now slowly getting our land back, but we do not have a legislature, a national organization, a government which will use military force for our protection, which will use judicial force for our protection. So Bharatiyas need to recognize this, and that, you know, the idea of a Hindu Rashtra is a perfectly acceptable idea, because it will give us the capacity then to legislate and to protect our tradition and our civilization. In that regard, tiny Israel is actually ahead of us, but we're catching up fast.
Next, Project Hindu Kush.
With Guruji's teachings, we at JD Gurukul are well equipped now in identifying dhimis. Apparently, Hindu community leaders in UK almost always fit the bill. Thoughts? Panditji being an exception.
Oh dear. So there is
Such a large body of Zimmis, you mean? Oh my God.
okay. So there are so many potential conflicts of interest surrounding that question that ordinarily I would recuse myself, but I would make one small observation, and that is that I always view the larger flow, the larger process. We are 4 generations now here in the United Kingdom, and when the people arrived here, the hostility with which they were received was devastating, and most people are completely unaware of it. Now, 4 generations later, we have virtually on the cusp of a prime minister of Indian origin. And this is an achievement. This is the investment of a lot of hard work and a lot of sacrifice. A fundamental part of that evolution is the appearance of Hindu organizations, which are guided by Hindu leaders. And this is a process of evolution. And sometimes evolution requires, shall we say, the Darwinian approach, in that the survival of the fittest is sometimes a solution. Otherwise, we also have the Darwinian understanding that, shall we say, nature renders extinct those beings and those ideologies which do not withstand evolution. So we're in a process of evolution, and I think our Indian origin organizations in the United Kingdom are experiencing a period of evolution. And I have a feeling that we're going to see a dramatic leap forward in that evolution within possibly even the next 14 days. You heard it here first.
Okay, we heard it here first. And next 14 days, that is on 29th, you said? 29th is the...
Well, Prabhu Kripa, shall we say? But there are changes coming.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Next. In Indian Hindu American community waking up, Rishabh Maheshwari, or are they still in the selfie mode? Is there any pushback against anti-Hindu hate? Vibhuti Ji, you should know better.
It's happening. I mean, yes, you are right. I mean, there are people who are still in the selfie mode. There are some people who would not contribute to my campaign because I was on the Republican side, and they were afraid that they will lose the Democratic votes or Democratic support. We are Democrats. There are people, but a whole chunk of people are now moving away from there because they are seeing that difference. The only thing is that quintessential thing called hope, which is the cause for man's existence and man's demise, both at the same time. The quintessential thing called hope is still keeping them. Maybe Democratic Party will change. They are now seeing the writing on the wall. So change is coming.
Yes,
Thank you.
I guess Tulsi would have triggered it further.
Yes.
Yeah. And not only that, people like yourselves, Vibhuti Ji, and now Tulsi Ji as well, you're ahead of the curve. And in every phenomenon, in every change, there are people who are ahead of the curve, who see that, the lookout on the mast of the Titanic, who look further and say, we need to make a change. There is a direction that we need to adopt, which is different to where we're going. And it takes a little bit of time for the majority to recognize that those who were ahead of the curve, who created a place into which they can then move, were actually to be appreciated and respected. And so that's happening. It's happening here. I don't know whether you saw in the news, but only last week, Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, was courting and trying to repair the damage that was done with the British Hindu community. He was at one of the largest temples here, and there has been an outreach to the High Commission. The new High Commissioner posted some tweets to that effect. And let's see whether it translates into a real change in policy. But if it does, then it will have been as a result of the efforts of people like yourselves, Vibhuti Ji, people like Tulsi Gabbard Ji, who have seen the direction of travel and said, we need to make spaces where people can come to. And so, no, I'm confident that in a short space of time, the flow of energy and of commitment and contribution will be to the space that you're now creating.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. But I also want to add the saying in America is the pioneer gets shot.
I'll interject now, is because we got a very large number of questions to go. So we need to move fast.
Yeah, we'll keep the answer short too.
Keep the answer
Shivam,
short.
Charan Sparsh Guruji, what can I, in my capacity of being a student, do to understand the situation? I feel bewildered. What should I study? Where should I start? You need a separate question. You need a separate conversation for that.
I think so.
Yeah, I
You need to
appreciate
start with the Jaipur dialogues, which you've
Yes.
already done. So you made the right beginning, I guess.
Right, right.
And if you want to fast track, I always recommend to people, read Sitaram Goyal, read Ram Sarupji. They were ahead of their time, and they have already created so many of the thoughts and the ideas and the words that are worth imbibing. Great place to start.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sharmaji, they just want to hide their cowardice in action behind big words. Imagine Uncle Scrooge with dollar sign as eyes to better understand them.
Well, I found the best person who passed comment on that was actually Sri Aurobindoji. He wrote a masterful essay called The Samurai and the Bourgeoisie, and he profiled every character that we have in our Hindu community. The gentleman activist who likes a little bit of credibility from being a revolutionary, but only as much so as not to cause him discomfort, for example. Do have a read of it. It's masterful.
It's masterful. My favorite. I always recommend to people to read that. Thank you for referring to it.
Next. Pat Broad. West is Islamizing and Hindus should recognize it fast. Well, we are. That's why we are here. Much Prawal. Sharma ji, thank you. Dhanyavad. Ganga Adat, Devanadat, Mr. Abbey murdered. Netanyahu and Bennett got changed. Bojo changed. I see Mr. Modi is attack against Hindus. There's some invisible force doing. Well, each of these incidents or each of these events can be explained separately, I guess. So that's that.
Hemachandra, after understanding the incidents of Kerala, is Captain Momo proponent of cannibalism? Does the Asmani book instruct a Hara Tide gang to target individual Hindus? Does the European Union fear Hindutva flourishing in Asia? Panditji.
I don't think the European Union fears Hindutva flourishing. Fear is something that's alien to them. Remember, the European Union has at its heart a Euro-Christian mindset, which is pragmatic. It is quite, shall we say, enterprising in its desires, and it has understood what Hindutva actually can give. Its journey, its difficulty is how does it become Hindutva without being recognized as having been anti-dharma for all of these millennia. And it's happening in front of everybody. Remember, the people of Europe are moving away from traditional religion at such a fast pace. The Church of England is seeing decline at a pace that it has never experienced before. So Europe is moving naturally from a blind religious tradition to a more enlightened approach to existence. And that is something that we can support and participate and embrace and help them to make that transition. With regard to the institutions of religion in Europe, which is different to the European Union, those institutions certainly do fear the rise of a Sanatani understanding. But this is, shall we say, it's a fear because they know that they will be caught out. What they have been hiding behind their cassocks and crosses for such a long period of time is being disclosed on a daily basis and discovered on a daily basis. Hindutva, as we know it to be, which is entirely dharmic and not the trope, not the straw man that's being created, is not something for Europeans nor indeed for the institutions to fear. I think we're looking forward to very pleasant transitions, even though they may look quite difficult at this time. I think that we will see an evolution very, very fast, and it will be very good.
Right. Next one. Ganga Datta Yamuna Datta Satishi, I heard once the Jews and Indians, Hindus, are the most intelligent races. Jews are done and we are next. Jews are done. Jews are flourishing.
Absolutely. Yeah, Jews are far from done, and we are far from done as well. You know, there are extensive relationships between the Jewish and the Sanatani family all over the world. You know, I hear so many times friends in the Jewish community saying that, you know, we have the same live and let live ethos, that, you know, we have been experiencing a great deal of suffering, and we have learned how to deal with it, but we have small numbers. Whereas you have large numbers, and we can share our experience with you. And between the two of us, we can make a huge contribution to humanity and the well-being of all. And so I think there's a wonderful opportunity, and I don't think that we are done by any means whatsoever.
Nishant Sharma, the West actually lost its will to live, as Spencer mentions in his book, The History of Jihad, as they are facilitating jihadis in murder, persecution, and exodus of non-Muslims everywhere.
Wow. Okay, so there is a vision of how the West thought it would evolve, and that vision was entrusted largely to the religious institutions, who then influenced the political classes. That vision, I think, is coming to an end. What's going to replace it is the challenge. The political structures, who are in the minority, I think, are possibly bankrupt of ideas. But what we are now seeing is the population saying, this is who we are. The population is now beginning to generate a nationalist identity, and it needn't necessarily be a hostile nationalist identity. What we are seeing in Italy, for example, the lady who has been accepted as prime minister, although she has some right-wing baggage to be dealt with, but she is articulating the voice of the Italian people, and it's sweeping away the existing political structures. This is going to happen more and more. Only yesterday, there was a wonderful coalition in the European Union who was speaking about their concerns about Pfizer and the manner in which Pfizer was allowed to run amok in the European Union. And it was a group of 5 or 6 nations who were coming together to say, we want to be together and challenge this. So there are coalitions happening all the time. There are relationships becoming visible, even though they may not yet be strong, all the time. And this is a dynamic which is always present. So I don't think Europe has gasped its last breath. I think it will have a moment of recognition of the gates of Vienna in the near future, and it will deal with it.
Project Hindu Kush, case in point, British Hindus are the most successful diaspora, but despite being over 1.1 million in UK, not even 100 shows up to a protest. Conclusion: higher tax bracket is directly proportionate to demitude. True or false?
Well, I think there is a great deal of truth in what has been said, but I think it's for a slightly different reason. Change, if you've been successful in a society, then the last thing you're going to see is the need for that society to change. If you have become very wealthy, you have become socially accepted, if you have climbed the ladder of social status in a society, then you're the last person to see that it needs to be changed. And so change always comes first from the large numbers who are at the lower levels of society. They're the ones who can come together and say, this is what's wrong with this society. They're the ones who turn up 100 at a time. Next time it'll be 400. The time after that, it'll be 1,000. People are learning how to do these things. This is a new experience for us. We haven't done it since independence. You know, there's a new generation who is saying we're wanting to be able to do these things. So I don't have a concern with that. People are learning, but you're absolutely right. The higher tax bracket, they have a lot to learn. They could contribute dramatically to these changes. Some of them are beginning to realize that this is necessary, but it's a process.
Next.
Panditji, do you foresee Indians leaving the West for India just the way they fled Uganda under the Idi Amin regime?
There is, shall we say, there is a roadmap where that could happen. Personally, I think there are plenty of opportunities to prevent it from happening, but whether it happens or not is actually down to the Hindu and the Indian diaspora in this country. I did a presentation, in fact, 3 years ago to a number of the leaders of the community, so a number of the large business people, and I showed them the influences which actually contributed towards Indians having to flee Uganda, Indians having to flee Kenya, Indians having to flee Zimbabwe. And sadly, there are certain elements and certain influences which will lead to that conclusion of the Bharatiyas having to leave this country. But it really depends upon whether those senior influencers, those large groups, those sampradayas, which wield numbers and assets, decide to swing into gear and understand what they have to do. The Bharatiya community in India is realizing how to reorganize its community assets to support its own protection. This is happening. In the diaspora, we need to have the communities realize that they too need to support their own protection. They need to create and fund the advocacy groups. They need to create and teach members of their community the harsh realities that they face. And these are part and parcel of the ecosystem that's appearing. But it's not by any means certain that it won't happen. I have a feeling that we will see a departure of Hindus from Malaysia next. The circumstances which arose in Uganda are now beginning to rear their head and show their presence in Malaysia. And the Malaysian community, we need to take some steps to ensure their own safety and security.
Panditji, crisper answers, because now we have still a lot of questions to go.
Next, Bharat, how can we engage UK and Indian society to work together for a better India-UK relationship? That's what we are doing right now. I think this question has been already answered. So
I'd make a small observation, and that is that India-UK relationship needs to be based on reality. The reality of the past elements of this relationship. There are many things that need to be reconciled, and then we can have a really genuine and authentic relationship. You know, we have a relationship which is akin to an abusive relationship. One party has been abusing the other party for such a long period of time, and you can't move forward into a happy, friendly relationship unless that abuse is acknowledged and in some way, shape or form healed. So I'm very keen that we should move forward to a genuine relationship. I'm not so keen that we should pretend that the past abuse has not occurred and blithely sort of assume that we're going to be all okay. It's not the truth.
Next.
Rishabh Maheshwari, in UK, post-Leicester, Conservatives came out as anti-Hindu, and Starmer, head of Labour, slammed Hinduphobia and visited Hindu temple. Strange times. Agree.
Well, there is an evolution happening, and I think it's probably worth saying that the first person who actually spoke the word Hinduphobia in Parliament was Bob Blackman, Padma Shri Bob Blackman. He raised it on the parliamentary calendar. I know that there have been conversations with the the special advisors who advise the leaders that this is an issue, and so it's good that Keir Starmer has recognised it. Because had he not recognised it, then what happened in Leicester and what is going to happen in Leicester as this inquiry falters and I think comes to an inappropriate conclusion, will really become a millstone around the neck of the Labour Party and the Labour leader as we approach the elections next year. So they are doing nothing other than what politicians do.
Okay, next.
Thank you, Sanjayji, and Jaipur Dialogues have learnt a lot from this platform about Hindu civilization, left liberalism, geopolitics, and more. I'm now much more aware about how to raise my children. Jai Hindu Rashtra. Thank you, PS.
Thank you so much.
Oneness. Panditji and Vibhuti sorry to be blunt, but the Indian diaspora in US and UK are blind as bats for indulging in wokeism. They needed this jolt to appreciate what's happening in India. I agree. But as I said earlier, we have talked about this question. I have nothing more to add if Panditji wants to add.
No, bluntness is good. Satyam ev jayate, irrespective of how blunt it is.
Right. Rabindra, learn from Jew and Muslim, even Sikh. Infiltrate all parties and push your agenda even if you disagree the party's domestic politics. Aim is making Dems policy pro-India Hindu. Doesn't matter if Dems destroy US. I have nothing to say on this. This is your observation, Rabindra, and whatever. Pat Broad, Kali Yuga is the age of action. Action will give victory. Panditji, this needs your comment.
Completely. Krishnji's parting words were Yata Ichasi Tata Kuru. It wasn't Tata sit down and have a chat. It was go out and engage. Act.
That's right.
Rahul Kulkarni, Har Har Mahadev, waiting for tomorrow's live Jaipur Dialogues after Kashi Temple verdict. Okay. Let's hope it is what I predicted today. Next. Oriental Lance Panditji, your points on their capability to respond is well noted. Any state power can achieve this if they so wish to. Does the British establishment have the stomach for a fight, or has the liberal rat made the leaders lose their any stomach for a fight? I don't doubt Anglo-Saxon willingness to fight, but decisiveness seems to be missing in their leadership. I think long question, but there can be a very short answer to this.
Gee, there is a subliminal conflict underway at this moment in time. The British population is losing trust in the British state. Every single day, the gulf becomes greater and greater. And the state has not acted to protect the interests of the British population. And so what happens then is that a voice arises, a group of people do come forward, and large numbers will gravitate towards them. Just remember, one Nigel Farage resonated with the voice of the people enough to take Britain out of Europe. That's how quickly these things can happen. That's how dramatically the change can come. And there are voices emerging from the average British population. They're a little bit clunky. They're a little bit unstable, a little bit passionate, but that's a part of the process. If the Labour movement gets its act together, and there is an indication that that's going to happen, then a centre-left voice will appear. And that, I think, it has the opportunity to take that centre ground. The centre-left ground is wide open, and it just needs a few people to come together, create a leadership, and occupy that space. It's wide open, and hopefully it'll happen.
Nagendra Saini, dear sir, in Gita, Sri Krishna directed to destroy evil adharma by all means. Why can't we destroy them with all wickedness that they possess? Till when we will be saints only? We need to become Kshatriyas now. I agree.
I agree as well.
You have to gather the means first.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. In an army, you need people who are willing to stand on the front line, but you also need people who are willing to feed them when they're on the front line and help look after their families and do everything else. Unless you support Kshatriyas with genuine resources and support, poor old Kshatriyas, they tend to get left out on a limb, as happens too often in our community. So it's got to be a joint effort. It has to be everybody. It has to be manpower. It has to be assets and resources. It has to be guidance from teachers and scholars, and it has to be courageous people stepping forward to do the hard work.
Next. Our government and all of us must use the term Hindutva-phobia instead of Hindu-phobia, even at UN. That won't make too much of a difference. I think let's go with whatever is acceptable. That brings us to the end of today's show. Wonderful having you, Panditji. Thank you, all viewers. Thank you, Panditji. Thank you so much for enlightening us. And thank you, Vibhuti Ji. Good night.
Good night. I have an announcement to make, Sanjay Ji, and to all the viewers of Jaipur Dialogue today, that for 2 weeks, I was not able to continue the Jaipur Dialogue USA because of scheduling changes. New time is Saturday, 10:30 a.m. New York time, which will be 8 p.m. in India and other places. The conversation would be with somebody who has written a wonderful book on Mr. Modi and how the West and how the entire world is attacking him. Tune in. Subscribe to Jaipur Dialogue USA in addition to your subscription to Jaipur Dialogue. Look forward to seeing you on the show on Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you. Jai Hind. Vande Mataram.
Jai Hind. Thank you.